Let's call it a standard that Carney has to meet, okay? Spending has to go down.
Mr. Speaker, I know many things. I know many things.
We are spending billions of taxpayers' dollars, much of it borrowed that my children and my grandchildren are going to have to pay for, just so we can virtue signal as we go to Davos and maybe swill back a bit of Perrier and eat canapes as we try to brag about how we're really dusting the Canadian economy.
The circus is back in Ottawa, and there are two major fights brewing in the House of Commons. The fight to fix our national finances and the fight to fix Canada's economy. Look, governments have strangled our economy and our energy sector for years with high taxes and onerous regulations. And we've got Dan McTeague with Canadians for Affordable Energy. He's coming on the show to talk about Canada's economy and what governments have done to roadblock our natural resource development. We're also going to have a fun segment on the show today. We got Kris Sims, and she's going to be on the show with a new segment called Clips with Kris, to break down all the taxpayer headlines and news stories that you don't want to miss. But first, we got to talk about the financial insanity here in Ottawa. So Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that he's finally going to table a federal budget on November the 4th. And you know what? Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre, he's back in the House of Commons, and he's got some clear questions to Carney about the federal budget, but Carney's answers are anything but clear. Let's watch this video with Carney and Poilievre going at it in the House of Commons.
How big is the deficit that the Prime Minister is running?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm looking forward with the Minister of Finance to releasing the budget on the 4th of November. That budget will contain the biggest investment in this country's future in a generation. Building homes, building new port infrastructure, new trade corridors, new energy infrastructure, building the strongest economy in the G7.
Well done.
Surely, if he was such an expert, he would know the size of his own deficit. It's now halfway through the fiscal year. 6 months have gone by, and he has announced $40 billion of additional spending. Deficits drive up inflation, grocery prices, housing costs, and interest rates. They drive out investment from our country and uncertainty that destabilizes our economy. That's why every other Prime Minister in Canadian history has announced the deficit at the beginning of the fiscal year. We're 6 months in. Does he even know the size of his own deficit?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I know many things. I know many things. And one of the things I know, the member opposite, the leader of the opposition, just mentioned interest rates. One thing I know is that Canadian interest rates are much lower than American interest rates. They're lower because this country's fiscal situation is strong, because this government has a plan to grow this economy, and we will keep doing it. We'll keep doing it.
Well, Carney didn't give you any clear details about the budget. He's just giving you a word salad. Now, folks, think about how crazy this really is, right? We're already halfway through the government's budget year. We have members of parliament who are in the House of Commons, and they're supposed to be voting on government spending, but nobody has any clue on just how much debt the government is in and how much it's borrowing this year, right? Like, how is anyone supposed to make any informed decision when the government won't make it clear just how bad of a deficit we have, right? Is the deficit $50 billion, $60 billion this year, $80 billion, $100 billion? Bueller. Well, look, nobody knows because Carney hasn't bothered to tell anyone. Well, you know what? Here's what we do know. Taxpayers have a very clear standard for Carney's first budget. Spending must go down. After a decade of out-of-control government spending in Ottawa, Carney's first budget will be a failure if he spends even $1 more than Justin Trudeau. And let's be just so real for a second, okay? We all know there is so much fat on Ottawa's steak to cut. The government has added 99,000 extra bureaucrats and ballooned the cost of the bureaucracy 77% since 2016. Now let that sink in and ask yourself this question. Are you getting anywhere close to 77% better services from the federal bureaucracy? Well, unless you work for the government and you're taking a taxpayer funded paycheck, I think the answer to that question is a big fat no. The federal government's corporate welfare is costing taxpayers about $11 billion every year. That means federal corporate welfare costs a Canadian family of four more than $1,100 a year, right? Federal corporate welfare, $11 billion a year. The cost to the Canadian family of four, more than $1,100 a year. Now, the federal government is taking your money and wasting your money like crazy. But here is the biggest waste that the federal government forces you to pay for: interest charges on the government debt. Federal debt interest charges cost you more than $1 billion every week. Okay, every dollar that you paid in federal sales taxes last year went to pay interest on the debt. The federal government doubled the debt in less than a decade. Your kids, your grandkids, even your great-grandkids are going to be making payments on that debt for the rest of their lives. So make no mistake about it, folks. We are in for a fight for our national finances, and there's another big fight, the fight for our livelihoods. And folks, we've got Dan McTeague with Canadians for Affordable Energy. He's coming on the show in just a second here, and he's going to break down what the government has been doing to roadblock major natural resource projects in Canada. Folks, here's my interview with Dan McTeague. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got Dan McTeague from Canadians for Affordable Energy on the show. Dan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm really chuffed about this. Thanks for having me there, Franco.
Oh, it's our pleasure. I mean, Dan, the reason I had to get you on the show is like you are such a go-to source for all things energy regulations, costs associated with those kind of things. So I just wanted you to get on the show and explain and break down for our viewers, like what is the landscape right now and all the government regulations that are driving up prices and hamstringing our economy.
Well, when you think that the oil and gas sector, and they're not the only ones, are really driving about 10 to 15% of our economy, and you saddle them with emissions caps, with blocking pipelines, with not being able to have any carry away capacity on the West Coast. When you look at the amount of money that's being given to various organizations to engage in lawfare, usually environmental, efforts at obstructing. When you combine that with provincial governments that have in the past used every tool in the toolbox, as they say, to block the very resources that the country desperately needs, for which it relies and which its prosperity is based. Well, not only do you wind up with people saying, I'm not investing in Canada, you wind up with a Canadian dollar that's worthless. It takes 138 pennies to buy a US dollar. Franco, I do a lot of work on gasoline, been doing it for 30 years. That's 24 cents a liter. A lot of people don't realize that a weak Canadian dollar compared to the US greenback also contributes to higher food prices, inflation. And it also tends to depress the willingness for people to want to invest in this country in an environment that says basically, nah, we don't want to do these things unless you decarbonize, whatever the heck that's supposed to mean. Look, this is not 2015 anymore, to use a Justin Trudeau. It's 2025, and we need to grow up and get serious about the ideas that have really contributed to Canada not really reaching its full potential and risking its economic future in terms of higher deficits, which you guys have talked about far more than I could. That has left a lot of Canadians feeling with less money and less with less confidence about the future of the nation as far as their ability to prosper in this nation for the first time in several generations.
Yeah, and speaking of people having less money in their pockets, speaking of the inflation crisis that we've gone to, I think this is a perfect time to talk about carbon taxes. And as I've been watching the House of Commons, Circus is back in town. You know what I noticed? That finally Liberal MPs are allowed to utter the words carbon tax. For a long time, it seemed like they weren't even allowed to mention it. But now they're bragging about repealing the consumer carbon tax. But here's the thing, right? There's other carbon taxes that the government has brought in, both with fuel regulations and then also hidden carbon taxes on Canadian businesses. And Dan, I would just love if you can give us some insight into what those costs are and exactly what those regulations are.
Yeah, well, those regulations are pretty severe. We have a suspension of the first carbon tax, which, Franco, you and I talked about going back to 2018, 2019, saying this would not work. And when Canadians hit a point where it's 20, 30 cents a liter on the price of gasoline, they would, in fact, push back. And they almost, brought the Liberal Party down because they were sick and tired of paying for something that's really about trying to pretend you can change the weather. The politics of that and the so-called disputable science aside, you're not just seeing the suspension of that one tax, which could come back at any time if it were any more popular. You have a second carbon tax, the clean fuel standard. Your colleague Kris and I have done a lot of work on this and pointing out that it's already 20 cents a liter in British Columbia. It's hidden because refiners have to go to the carbon credit market. Talk about buying something that exists only in thin air, literally. It's a really weird market, and it's the kind of stuff that is leading increasingly to higher costs for Canadians. So 5 cents a liter across the rest of Canada for gasoline, about 7 cents a liter for diesel. It's already being charged on your fuel bill, and people don't really realize it. Then we have the OBPS, the output-based pricing system, which basically requires any manufacturer that has so-called emissions of CO2. My God, I guess I should stop exhaling. Where they're required now to go to the carbon credit market and buy these credits, and they're not inexpensive. Very few other countries do this. Certainly not countries that are economically dependent on a strong resource sector for which we earn our bread and butter. And like it or not, for my trendy friends here in Toronto who work in the financial sector and service sector, without 15% of your GDP of your economy being driven by the things that the rest of the world seems to want, you're going to wind up in a far worse scenario. And it won't just be the high cost of food. It's really the high cost of everything driven by government that's still believing that this idea that net zero is worth pursuing when in fact it has been thoroughly repudiated. And we're seeing this in Europe, we're seeing this in Africa, and we're certainly seeing it in Asian countries.
I'm glad you brought up some of those points, right? Because, like, number one, when Carney was, singing for his supper during the election, he was trying to claim, oh, don't worry, folks, the industrial carbon tax, the hidden carbon tax on Canadian businesses, you won't pay it. It's just the large companies that'll pay it. But, like, come on. Unfortunately for Carney, Canadians aren't stupid. And we released some Leger polling that showed 70% of Canadians weren't buying Carney's spin. They're like, no, of course we're going to pay it, right? A carbon tax is a carbon tax is a carbon tax. And 70% said, like, businesses are going to pass on some or most of the cost of his industrial carbon tax. Dan, let me just pick up on a point that you said, because I think it's the most important point, where you look around countries, and countries aren't imposing carbon taxes on their citizens like what Canada was doing. You look at the United States, right? No carbon tax from the White House, regardless of who is occupying the White House, right? So, like, I always say Carney's carbon tax is the worst of all worlds, higher prices for you, fewer jobs for Canadians. Speaking of bad policies implemented by Trudeau and something that Carney's clinging on to, I want to talk about the gas and diesel car ban, or the ban on the sale of new gas and diesel vehicles. Those restrictions were going to start to kick in beginning in 2026, a couple months from now. Now, Carney is delaying that ban for a year, right? The ban, they'll be fully implemented by 2035. He's delaying it for a year, and he's going to do a 60-day review. Dan, what do you make of all that?
Well, why review something that should be punted? The fact is that Ontario's economy, 15% of the economy of Ontario depends on the automotive sector, that we have backed electric vehicles. And I know Doug Ford's part of this little scheme, but the reality is that it's a scheme that leads to nowhere. People are walking away from these things. Once they can't mooch or get a few bucks from the government to buy these things, they don't want them. And why would you? 6 months of the year, this country is too damn cold to be able to leave by the battery of my phone out in the middle without it going power of the battery going down. So why would we need something that is less efficient, more costly, less environmentally friendly? And I can say that because the batteries can't be recycled, and for which we are spending billions of taxpayers' dollars, much of it borrowed that my children and my grandchildren are going to have to pay for, just so we can virtue signal as we go to Davos and maybe swill back a bit of Perrier and eat canapes as we try to brag about how we're really dusting the Canadian economy. The reality is that the electric vehicle mandate was gone, DOA, the moment Donald Trump took over and said, I'm getting rid of the electric vehicle mandate. So 80 to 90% of all the vehicles that you're going to export to the United States no longer have a market. They don't have a market in Canada, and they certainly don't have a market in the United States. And we know that electric vehicles lead to one thing: bankruptcy. Think of Lion, think of Northvolt, but there are many others. This is really a true white elephant, and it's time it died a quick and sudden death.
Hear, hear. I love it. I wish I could end it there, but I have two more questions for you. And this one I've really wanted just to get your insight on. I almost just called you just to pick your brain, but it's why not just record a conversation, right? So I want to talk about the Major Projects Office. And I don't want to lead you anywhere, but I'll just tell you what I think. Look, I want the government to make it easier for job creators to actually build stuff here in Canada. Right? It seems like we've been chasing away investors, chasing away job creators for a decade plus now with these onerous regulations and taxes. But my issue with the major projects office is like, look, we don't need politicians and bureaucrats pretending like they know what projects in the national interest, where a handful of projects will get streamlined. But then every other potential investment still has to go through the same onerous hoops that they would have had to go like just a year ago, right? So that is my issue with the major projects office is like, well, hold on a second. Why don't we just cut red tape, cut the regulations, cut these mandates, cut taxes, and attract investment across the board? Dan, what do you think about the major project? Am I off? Am I right? What do you think?
Well, you're going to be right on November 4th when we have a deficit that balloons to levels we haven't seen since 1997. And the IMF and bondholders are going to start to look at Canada's credit worthiness. And it won't be just the Canadian government. It'll obviously the provinces like mine here in Ontario and Quebec who are going to have to finally fess up to the fact that this net zero fantasy that has really led to the eclipsing and the suppressing and the diverting of investments and interests in Canadian resources away from us. And as a result, not only do we have a weak Canadian dollar, we also look at the scenario here where who the heck wants to invest in these major projects, assuming this board, a bunch of bureaucrats can come together to determine what we already know. We know which projects need to be done. And when it comes to oil and gas, you had 17 of them, you scuppered almost every one of them. And at least 2 Northern Gateway Energies would be a good starting point. But you've dithered for the past 6 or 7 months. And you said, oh, we can wait. Let's talk about it. Let's have a wonderful thing. Look, it's like being on an airplane that's heavily laden with a lot of passengers and a lot of weight. And you're taxing and you're taxing. You know this thing's probably not going to take off. Sooner or later, the Liberals are going to have to make a decision along with their elbozos up friends. Are you with the idea of net zero and more economic decline? Or do you want to actually do what many are saying now? It's time to nix net zero and all of its negative aspects that are serving as a drag on the Canadian economy, prosperity, and future generations.
Dan, I got one last question for you. And not only do I just love the way you break down what's going on policy-wise, but you also have a great mind for politics, right? And what's going on in the House of Commons. So, where do you see this fight, the political fight, the natural resource fight? Where do you see all this going next?
Well, the Liberals are going to have to renounce everything they've done over the past 10 years. And they're going to have to say, we were wrong. We got it splendidly wrong. We've done the country in, and we're going to have to adopt the policies of the people we defeated. Now, I know people don't like to have the idea of maybe Pierre Poilievre being the prime minister, but everything he said has so far come to be true. And now that you've walked away from the first main carbon tax, you're walking away from electric vehicle mandates, you're walking away from possible emission caps, there isn't much left in what you've represented over the past 10 years that you must repudiate. I think it would be incumbent on the Liberals to put an end to the facade and say, yes, we got it spectacularly wrong. We like the conservative policy of the last election and a few other additionals, and we are going to bring the country and the back to the center, and we're going to bring the finances of this country back to where it belongs, to a balanced position as it was when I was a Liberal member of Parliament.
Dan, where can people go find more of your work? Plug away.
Franco, when I'm not working with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, affordableenergy.ca and gas price predictions are there as well. I want to help people manage their budgets. I hope everybody listened to what we had to say today, which was hold off because gas prices were dropping 10 cents a liter. We were spot on, and most people have made more money from that prediction than they are from help from the Canadian government.
There you go, folks. Dan McTeague, Canadians for Affordable Energy. Thanks for coming on the show.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Franco.
And folks, we're going to be bringing in Kris Sims, okay, to go over the big taxpayer news stories and headlines of the week. So stay tuned. Clips with Kris coming up next. Hey, we've got Kris Sims coming on the show to go over the big taxpayer news stories and headlines of the week. Kris, welcome to our brand new segment. Drum roll, please. Clips with Kris. All right, Kris, let's get into it. I'm just going to read some headlines, some big taxpayer news stories from the week, and I just want to get your reaction, and we can go back and forth and gab a little bit. Okay, so the first headline comes to us from the online investigative news site, Blacklock's Reporter. They're doing fantastic work, and it's just billed $1,107 on new shoes, and they're talking about the Governor General. So, Kris, take it away. What do you think?
Yeah, so I'm not the best girl to ask about shoes because I shop for shoes at thrift stores, but I'm just saying The Governor General already makes enough coin. She doesn't have to be billing Canadian taxpayers $1,100 for shoes. Now, what I didn't understand, and I'm too dumb because I'm reading it, and I know they wrote it well, but I was too dumb to understand if this was on one pair of shoes or if this was on several pairs of shoes, because wardrobe was a whole nother level. Wardrobe was a whole nother entry. All it said on there was shoes that I saw. And either way, it doesn't matter. Frankly, the Governor General makes a ton of money. She lives in a mansion, like an actual mansion. I've been in there, okay? She does not need to be billing taxpayers like this. It makes the Governor General's position look bad, and it makes people super mad at her. So she should probably knock this off.
Yeah, so look, let me just read a little bit more from this story too, right? From Blacklocks, again, great job digging, Blacklocks. Thank you for your service. Okay, so the government documents in the House of Commons showed that Mary Simon, the Governor General, she billed taxpayers for a little bit over $7,000 on footwear and apparel last year. Okay, expenses included, like I said, $1,100 for shoes, an $875 blazer, a $675 wool jacket, and $165 silk camisole. Like, Kris, I don't even know what that is. Like, what is that?
A camisole is like a fancy tank top that you wear underneath a dress. So when ladies have like, a dress where it comes down to here or whatever, or if it's too clingy, they have to put a camisole underneath it. Basically, it's a fancy tank top that has like a little bit of doodad lace on the top of it so they can wear it under a dress. It's similar to where ladies will wear a slip. So that way their skirt is not sticking to their legs. Paying more than $100 for one is insane. Back when give you this way. Back when the Bay used to still exist, okay, you'd go in there to find fancy stuff. You would not be paying $160 for a camisole. Like, I literally don't know where the Governor General looked to find this thing. Like, that should be, even a fancy one, should be $50 max.
Yeah, so folks, Kris also said, like, the Governor General, Mary Simon, she's already making a ton of money, right? Her salary is $378,000 a year, folks. So, like, you can buy your own shoes. Okay,
yeah,
and your own blazers and your old camisoles, whatever that is. I'm still not convinced that's a real thing, folks. The reason that she's billing taxpayers for her clothing is because of this crazy perk that governors general get. They're able to bill taxpayers up to $130,000 for their clothing allowance over their 5-year term. It's absolutely nuts. We've talked about the Governor General, crazy waste and perks that should have been reined in a long time ago. Hat tip, though, to Blacklocks for digging this up, going through government documents. All right, Kris, I just want to throw 2 more big news stories at you, and let's get your reaction. So the next one comes from taxpayer.com. Kris, you were the author of this. British Columbia must stop its debt spiral.
Yeah, this is brutal. So our BC director, Carson Binda, he's away on vacation. So they set me loose on the BC government and they gave their quarterly fiscal update. Basically what that means in normal people talk is they updated their budget numbers. It's brutal. I've got the numbers right here in front of me. So last time we checked on them, they had a debt of $133 billion with a B. This is BC. Now the debt is $155 billion. That is an increase in their debt of 16%. Okay? It gets worse. That also means, of course, that their debt interest payments have gone up, which, of course, again, costs BC taxpayers billions of dollars a year, like with a B. What got me also, Franco, 2 things. 1, BC has zero excuse to be running deficits and to be piling on the debt. Like, we wouldn't excuse it in any province, but, if you're landlocked and you don't have natural resources and there's nothing there but, some turnips, we sympathize. We still expect you to balance a budget. BC, they're literally sitting on gold mines with an entire coastline full of ports to be able to sell their stuff around the world, and a young, skilled labor force that is hungry for work. Like, zero excuse. Zero. The other number that jumped out at me real quick here, Franco, and I think you saw this too when you were going through the budget document, they're full-time employees. Like, the size of their bureaucracy is exploding. If you go back to 2018 and you go to now, their bureaucracy is grown by 34%. It's gross. So I think they were taking some lessons from Prime Minister Trudeau, former Prime Minister Trudeau, But BC has got to get its act together, man.
Okay, I just want you to smack back some of the spin that I'm hearing from politicians, because
Sure.
I heard some of the politicians, like, obviously the debt is insane, the mass amount of borrowing, insane. But what I heard these politicians in BC, the government politicians saying is like, oh, well, the reason our debt and deficit is so big is because the foregone carbon tax revenue. So, Kris, I know that that is pure spin. What do you say? Cut through that politician spin for me here.
See, that's real cute because what about all the other times when they did have the carbon tax and they were running horrible deficits and cranking up the debt? So if you go back to even EB's tenure here, he is piling on the debt like it's going out of style. Like, to be as fair as I possibly can, when I first took over that job in 2017 out there, if you looked at it carefully, they were balancing the budget, okay? So back then they had a different, Carol James was the finance minister. She seemed very earnest about saving people money. Seemed like she wanted to take it on. And so they were kind of being sort of a little bit careful. Now, like, the training wheels are off, the guard wheels have been blown off the side of the highway. They're just spending money like crazy. And so if they're trying to use the excuse of we got rid of the consumer carbon tax, finally, that's good that they did that. What was their excuse all the other years when they were blowing money? And frankly, any government that spends one nickel on wood leather soccer balls, which they're spending taxpayers' money on stupid crap like that. Any government that spends $1 on that can't be taken seriously. So they're clearly not taking their money seriously, and this carbon tax thing is just an excuse. No government, no media should let them off the hook with that answer.
Yeah, hint, you've got a spending problem, not a
Yes.
revenue problem. Okay,
Yes.
folks? All right, ready? The last news story that I want to throw at you today, Kris, is Carney says federal public service cuts will happen through attrition.
Okay, so it won't. I know this guy, Franco Terrazzano, who's really good with numbers, and he's explained very thoroughly why this can't happen just through attrition. But correct me if I'm wrong, did I see the new parliamentary budget officer? Was that a person I saw on Parliament Hill? There was some official person that was at committee, dude that I haven't seen before,
Yeah,
saying
interim. He's the new interim PBO. Yeah.
he said this ain't happening through attrition.
Yeah,
Like, this
sure
is
did.
this is not happening through attrition. And for folks who don't know, like, attrition basically means we'll just let the car keep running and it'll eventually run out of gas. We don't need to push our foot on the pedal. It'll just naturally evaporate. So they're actually hoping and wishing at the federal government level that people who retire, who quit through their own purposes, whatever, who just fall away from the bureaucracy, that'll take care of their spending problem and the size of the bureaucracy. Like, it won't. Like, the math is too big. What is it? A 70% increase since 2015?
77%. That's how much the cost of the bureaucracy has gone up since 2016. 77% increase. Look, guys, like, the federal government added 99,000 extra bureaucrats in a decade. Okay? Yeah. When you add 99,000 extra government bureaucrats in a decade, attrition ain't going to cut it.
No.
Not even close. And
Nope.
like, look, we've heard Carney talk about, we were talking about early on in the show about the budget. It's coming November 4th. Well, in the last campaign, right, Carney said he's going to balance the operating budget by the end of his term. That's silly. It's not a real balanced budget, but set that aside for a second. Look, if Carney were to even balance the operating budget, guess what, folks? The bureaucracy consumes 55% of the operating budget. Okay, so look, there's not even close to balancing any budget in Ottawa unless the government, severely shrinks the size and cost of its bureaucracy.
You know what this reminds me of? So initially we were hearing, oh, it's going to be reductions, like actual cuts. And now, of course, naturally that, PSAC and all the other government unions have been freaking out all summer. They're like, oh, maybe it's just going to be attrition. If you are morbidly obese, okay, like, you're super overweight, your doctor's saying, you know what, like, you've got diabetes, like, this is going to kill you. Your knees are giving out. You have to, get in shape. What Carney's talking about now of, oh, let attrition do it. This is like saying, okay, I'm going to park further away in the parking lot from the donut and pizza shop, and I'll walk there from the other end of the parking lot. And that will take care of my health problem. It won't. It won't. You need diet, exercise, and a radical change to your life in order to save yourself. That is the situation. I'm not putting words in your mouth. This is how I feel. That is the situation I'm seeing here at the federal government. They're 77% overweight. They have got to do some serious cutbacks here.
Hear, hear. Hey, Kris, thanks for coming on the show today. Hey, the very first episode of the Franco Terrazzano Show, folks, you'll notice we kind of changed up the formatting. But really, Kris, great job today. First segment time we've done this, Clips with Kris. I like the name. I'm a little biased. But, Kris, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks, Franco. Have fun at the gym.
Hey, folks, speaking of the gym, we got to get the federal bureaucracy a treadmill here, maybe a Stairmaster. Who knows? Send them around for a 10K. I hear High Rocks is really popular nowadays. Now, folks, thanks again for watching the Franco Terrazzano Show. I think we had a fun time. 2 things that you can do to fight for taxpayers today. Number 1, let us know in the comments what you thought about this new format, this new show. Okay, let us know what you want to hear about moving forward. We're going to read the comments, and I look forward to hearing what you say. But number 2, the second thing that you can do for taxpayers this week is sign up for the weekly Taxpayer Waste Watch, okay? It is a free newsletter from your friends at the Canadian Taxpayers Federation that goes into your email inbox once a week. And folks, if you want to be the most informed taxpayer, if you want to use facts to smack down that pesky big government neighbor that you have right down the street, this is the newsletter for you. So you can sign up for the Taxpayer Waste Watch newsletter. We're going to put a link to that right in the show notes, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. I'm a little biased, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. Anyways, fellow tax fighters, that's all from me. Look, I'm Franco Terrazzano. I'm going to keep fighting against big spending, big entitlement politicians and bureaucrats, and I hope you'll keep fighting with me. Until next time.